Hello, Jacksonites! Surprise! I'm actually doing two videos today. I got a good chunk of spare time on my hands, so I figured why not? May as well take advantage of it. Um, Last year I started up a series called Super Cinema Rank, where I was going to go through every single decade slash year of cinema going back to the 1930s and rank every single film that I've seen from worst to best. And obviously, I will be continuing that series, but I am going to do it a little bit differently because the process of getting this series together was very tedious and time consuming. And I didn't really want to go from the 30s and the 40s and then the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and so on and so forth. Especially so, I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but uh, the 30s and 40s I did in one video because for both decades I had seen less than 20 movies. And for the 50s, 60s, and 70s, all three of those decades will be done in one video each because for a few of those years in each decade, I've either seen one or two films from one year or sometimes no movies in one year. So I'm just going to compile all those into one. But starting with the 80s and then the 90s, especially with the 90s, every year I've seen like 18 to 25 movies a year. So that'll be like one episode of Super Cinema Rank a year. But I've also been wanting to talk about recent years in film, especially since the beginning of the 2020s. The film business has drastically shifted and changed in terms of the kind of content that we see and how it's made, especially with the overwhelming amount of streaming services putting out original stuff, like Netflix, Hulu, Apple TV doing original stuff. And I also am a big fan of a lot of movie review YouTubers. They do like their best and worst of X year. That's the most recent, like best and worst of 2020 or best and worst of 2019, best and worst of 2023. So I kind of want to just when I continuing on with this series, so I was as you read the title, Super Cinema Rank Episode 2, I will be ranking all the films that I've seen from the years 2020 and 2021, mainly for a couple of reasons. While I have seen a fair amount of films from 2021, I still think that it wasn't quite enough content for one video's worth. And with 2020, I've only seen 14 films from that year. That wasn't enough either for one video, but I also, especially with 2020, just did not have very much to say for a lot of those video or fuck. I did not have a whole lot to say about a lot of those movies because it's hard not to forget, but for those who choose not to remember, 2020 was an ungodly dry, mediocre, and frustrating year for entertainment. So many movies got delayed, so many movies were postponed, and so many films were just like leftovers and like felt like leftovers from 2019. And all the good stuff was being pushed back. And then all that we were left over was, for the most part, just a lot of stuff that the studios just didn't really know what to do with. But I also do want to just get the 2020s done and over with so that by the time 2024 comes to an end and then 25 and so on and so forth, well, hopefully I'll have a lot of Super Cinema Rank taken care of by then. But I just want to get the 2020s done and over with right now. And then I might move on to the 50s and 60s and so on and so forth. I also need a little bit more time to work on the 50s, 60s, and 70s videos because I've seen 50 films from the 1970s. So that's going to take a little bit of time to go through. But with all that being said, with all that out of the way, let us get into Super Cinema Rank episode 2, and let's talk about the dreaded year of 2020. Now, as I mentioned, 2020 was a very frustratingly mediocre year for films. We were just kind of left with a bunch of scraps and random shit that we just did not that studios didn't know what to do with, and we just kind of had to work with what we were given because all the good stuff was pushed back to later years, as you'll see with 2021. But there were still some good films. I think, yeah, for 2020, I think my top 5, I definitely would say these are the best films of 2020, relatively. But hands down, at the bottom of the barrel for the year of 2020, at number 14, is Superman Man of Tomorrow, the first film in Warner Brothers' Tomorrowverse, the replacement for the DC animated movie universe. Yeah, this movie is about as dry as an old cat turd. It's got a good concept. Superman teaming up with Martian Manhunter to fight off Lobo and a giant kaiju-sized parasite. Cool concept. It definitely seems like it would tackle a lot of xenophobic or, you know, protection of aliens themes or some shit like that. But nah, and I'm according to Shawnee Boy, I haven't seen any of the other Tomorrowverse movies like Legion of Superheroes, Batman: The Long and Dark Halloween or The Long Halloween, and like Justice League World War II Society or some shit. I haven't seen any of those other movies, but I'm really not interested in seeing them. And from a big part of that is because of what I saw from Superman Man of Tomorrow. The animation is very flat and dry. It's a lot more colorful than the DC animated movie universe, which I like. But there's not very much action. And what action we do have is just kind of boring and lazily animated and lazily put together. The voice acting is both decent, but also kind of poor. Everybody just sounds bored. In this movie in particular, the only one who feels like they're trying is the voice actor for Lobo. And also, Lobo is completely wasted in this movie. Lobo's a big fan favorite character, but in this movie, he's just kind of flat and dry. And he's not in the movie all that much, which is a big shame. But yeah, he's the only voice actor who feels like he tries. The guy who voices Lex Luthor is miscast. Superman is very flat and dry. Parasite looks cool, but by the end of it, he just feels very utterly disinterested and disengaged. So yeah, Man of Tomorrow has a decent concept, but it was just very flat and dry. Not a good start for the new series, which apparently hasn't gotten much better. And ironically, speaking of the DC animated movie universe, at number 13 is Justice League Dark Apocalypse War. I've talked about this movie a few times, so I don't have much else to say about it. This isn't a bad film technically, and really for 2020, aside from Superman Man of Tomorrow, for a good chunk of this list, there's just a bunch of movies that are either just okay or there's just not much to say about. Though there are some really good ones, but yeah, just for a lot of 2020, we just had nothing but very mediocre films for the majority of the time. But Justice League Dark Apocalypse War, it's not a bad movie, but it's not a fun movie either. I don't want to see a movie where so many beloved characters just get massacred the entire time. And that's this movie in a nutshell. It's very bleak, it's very dour and dire, it's very somber, it's very sad, fucked up, and depressing. There is some entertaining action, there's some good dialogue, and there's some good emotional, heartfelt moments. But aside from it being bleak and dour, it also has a very unsatisfying, very ambiguous cliffhanger, intentional ending that really does not leave a good taste in my mouth. Shawnee Boy has said a few times that this movie needs a part two. And well, maybe with this upcoming Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths trilogy coming out, that maybe we can get some kind of follow up from that series with those movies. But it seems like Warner Brothers is just going out of their way to not give us a part two to this movie. And I think that's a real shame. So yeah, with the ending being very anticlimactic and the movie just being a mean spirited um not a snooze fest, but it's just not a fun film for the most part. That's why Justice League Dark Apocalypse War is at the bottom. I also think they should have just called it Justice League Apocalypse War. Justice League Dark Apocalypse War just does not roll off the tongue very well. Coming in at number 12 is Wonder Woman 1984. I already talked about this one a good chunk for my DC EU ranking video, but this is not a bad film, but it's not as good as the original Wonder Woman. The action scenes aren't as fun. Gal Gadot's performance as Wonder Woman is good, but it's not as strong as the original. Not by that much, but there's just something missing. The villains are piss poor. The effects for Cheetah are absolutely terrible. The villain should not have been Cheetah, nor should it have been Maxwell Lord. Even though Pedro Pascal does a good job playing him. And yes, the circumstances regarding Steve Trevor's resurrection are definitely very questionable and strange. I still say the strongest thing you can say about Wonder Woman 84, it is a very good superhero romance movie. Again, it's questionable, but still the chemistry between Gal Gadot and Chris Pine is still very strong, very pitch perfect, and definitely Gal's best performance, and probably Chris's best performance too, is the scene when Gal renounces her wish. It is almost a tearjerker. Excuse me. Before I resume, a word from our sponsor. So, yeah, not much else to say about Wonder Woman 84. It's not a bad film, but it's just not as good as Wonder Woman 2017. Coming in at number 11 is Jiu-Jitsu, a direct-to-video, like, futuristic martial arts movie. Um, wasn't a bad film. I watched this when Roman was first born, and it had some good fight scenes. It had a decent concept. It's got a good cast, and it surprisingly has a pretty large budget for a direct-to-video movie, $25 million. Although I'm sure a lot of that budget went to Nicolas Cage's paycheck because he's only in 4 or 5 scenes and he dies. So you're like, oh, yep, that's definitely the end of the most expensive actor. But there's other actors too, like Frank Grillo's in this, who I think he's kind of wasted. There's a couple other martial arts actors that are in here that are pretty solid. There's some good fight scenes. There's some surprisingly decent gore. And I do look forward to, if it's still being made, the sequel to this film. But just overall, in the scope of this list. It's just here mostly by default. I don't have much to say about it. And I've also only seen it once. Actually, a lot of these movies I've only seen once. Coming in at number 10 is Freaky, the kind of spinoff to the Happy Death Day films, as it's directed by the same guy, Christopher Landon, and he has stated that this movie does take place in the Happy Death Day universe. So hearing this, I was pretty excited, and especially when I noticed that this film is R-rated, unlike the Happy Death Day movies, I was even more excited. And while it has a really novel concept, it is essentially Friday the 13th or Halloween mixed with Freaky Friday, specifically the Jamie Lee Curtis version. And yeah, cool concept, not the best execution. Um, it kind of goes out of its way almost to go against what I've always said about the Happy Death Day films. If those films were R rated, they would be even better. They could have more graphic kills, they could have more raunchy jokes, and uh, the shackles of PG-13 being removed could have the emotional moments hit that much harder if they were completely unrestrained. While Freaky is technically unrestrained, it still chooses to restrain itself, in my opinion. The jokes are funny, but they're not as funny as they should be. There are a couple decent kills, but it's not as violent or graphic as I feel like it wants to be. And it at times is just a very paint by numbers generic slasher movie. The only thing that makes it unique is the concept of it being a teenage girl and a 40-year-old serial killer swapping different bodies. And that part of the film is definitely where the film shines best. Vince Vaughn is really funny, and he's really good at playing both characters, the sociopathic serial killer and a 40-year-old man with the mind of a teenage girl. He is really funny and he is very entertaining. He's definitely the highlight of the movie. But everything outside of that surrounding him is just very generic and basic. Um, yeah, not a bad film, but it's just not as good as it should have been, unfortunately, which is a shame. Coming in at number 9 is The Hunt. This movie got a huge amount of controversy when it was coming out, saying like it's how do I put this? Like there was still a lot of anti-Trump people that were around at the time, and they were saying that this movie apparently was like supporting Trump. It was like supporting the purge or some shit like that. There's just a lot of political controversy that was surrounding this movie. But when I finally saw it, I was like, what the hell is the big deal? It's just an action movie. Like, sure, there is some commentary on how social media and taking things out of context can ruin relationships and lives. And it does have a bit too heavy handed of a staying true to politically correctness bullshit that really doesn't sit well with me. But there's some good performances, there's some good actors. Like Ethan Suplee, he's pretty funny in this movie, and Hilary Swank, terrible name, Hilary Swank, plays an entertaining bad guy or bad villain in this movie. There's some decent action. There's a couple good fight scenes. There's a couple good jokes. It kind of has a messy storyline, but overall, I thought The Hunt was pretty harmless and entertaining enough. Not special by any means, but decent for what it is. At number 8, is skewing more towards movies I like. From 8 on, these are all movies that I like. Although this is the least of which we have Monster Hunter. I do not know how accurate this movie is to its source material, the Monster Hunter video games, but and it is a Paul W.S. Anderson movie, which I think it's his first one since Resident Evil: The Final Chapter. So, um, I definitely do like it. It is definitely better than Resident Evil: The Final Chapter. Let me tell you what. There's some, there's good cinematography. There's way better fight scenes and way better choreography and editing as opposed to Final Chapter. Ugh. There's a decent cast: Mila Jovovich, Tony Jaa, and Ron Perlman. Can't go wrong. Um, there's some really good special effects. There's some cool monster designs. There's some decent action scenes. It's a fun monster movie. But of all the movies on this list, I even though it's kind of smack dab in the middle, I just kind of have the least to say about it. I definitely have to give it a rewatch because I think I might have this on for Super Kaiju Binge. I'm not sure yet though. Excuse me. Coming in at number 7 is Love and Monsters. I was actually pretty pleasantly surprised by this movie. A monster movie a la the style of Zombieland. It's a post-apocalyptic movie, but instead of zombies, it's just a bunch of mutated bugs, frogs, lizards, and other small animals going around eating people. Um, but it's a fun flick. It's got some good performances, a decent cast, a really cool concept, and some really damn solid special effects, especially for a $25 million budget, which is surprising. There's not a whole lot of monster action, but what we do have is entertaining enough. I do think that this movie does suffer from not being R-rated because we have a bunch of killer animals going around, like again, giant frogs, giant centipedes, giant scorpions, even giant lampreys going around eating people. But there's like slime and goo and ooze, but there's not a whole lot of bloodshed, which I think is a big shame. But this movie also has one of the cutest dogs I've ever seen in any movie. There's a scene that feels like a nice homage to the original Tremors, which I definitely approve of. And the ending feels like kind of a bit of a fuck you ending. But still, Love and Monsters was a pretty fun flick. The last 15 or 20 minutes is when it kind of loses me, but overall Love and Monsters is a solid movie. It's actually nominated for best special effects during the Oscars that year, which I thought was pretty appropriate. Coming in at number 6 is Underwater. I already talked a little bit about this movie, but I was again very pleasantly surprised by Underwater. Amazing special effects, great action scenes, great creature designs, a mind-blowing surprise appearance by Cthulhu, the legendary Lovecraftian monster. Um, the best thing you can say about this one is all the underwater settings are pitch perfectly, fantastically executed, and the suspense and creep factor of literally being 7 miles into the deepest parts of the ocean really does a good job of making your skin crawl. The only thing about this I don't care for is the main character sacrifices herself, which I think is kind of mean-spirited and stupid. But Underwater is a damn fine movie. One of the most underrated movies of 2020. And one of the most underrated underwater horror films of all time. Should have been R-rated though. But it doesn't suffer nearly as badly. Coming in at number 5 is Tremors Shrieker Island. Already talked a whole bunch about this. This feels like a proper return to proper Tremors, unlike A Cold Day in Hell. Um, Michael Gross does a good job as Burt Gummer. The effects are good. There's some decent monster action. The Return of the Shriekers is appreciated. Still don't like Burt Gummer dying. Even though I've said I'm okay with it, I still don't like it. They filmed an ending where Michael Gross survived, but they decided to not go with that or leave it intentionally ambiguous, which was stupid and bullshit. Kind of felt like Universal just saying, "Yeah, we're done paying Michael Gross. Fuck you." Still though, Tremor 7 is a fun flick. Coming in at number 4 is the first Sonic the Hedgehog movie. I was quite pleasantly surprised by this. It definitely is very prototypey in many ways. Like the action and scope and scale is kind of small. Really, it gets big and bombastic in the second, like the last third of the film is when things really ramp up. But like it's really funny. There's great chemistry between Cyclops and Sonic. James no, not that. I don't remember his name, but maybe James Marsden, I think his name was. But yeah, those two, the chemistry is really good, really strong. Yeah, it's really funny. It's well paced. There's some decent jokes and some good, not mind blowing, but good action scenes and pretty good special effects. And I'm very glad that Paramount wisened up and decided, nah, let's not go with that original ugly Sonic design. Had they done that, I'll bet you this movie would have flopped hard. So good on the internet for in a good way bullying a studio into not making a bad decision. Coming in at number 3 is The Invisible Man 2020. Said it before, this does not feel like a remake of The Invisible Man. It does kind of feel like a different script that was rewritten at the last minute and then made into a uh Invisible Man type film, but that still doesn't stop it from being one of the best movies of the 2020s. The suspense is great, the performances are solid, the effects are really good. There's some decent action scenes, um, and the domestic violence and gaslighting elements are very well done, and they're also done very tastefully. I think it doesn't feel exploitative or shoved down your throat. It's a central part of the movie and it's handled very well. um Again, not in an exploitative way. So yeah, The Invisible Man is a damn solid movie. I still do stand by that Hollow Man is a better remake of The Invisible Man, but that doesn't take anything away from this movie. Coming in at number 2 is Bad Boys for Life. I fucking love this movie. After 17 goddamn years of waiting for a new Bad Boys movie, we finally got it. I don't know if it was 100% worth waiting 17 years for, but they tried as hard as they could. And I think 99.9% of the time they do nail it. I think the last like 5 to 10 minutes feel a little rushed and a little anticlimactic, but overall, this is a damn solid Bad Boys movie. There's lots of nods to the first two movies. It does have a similar tone, more a la to the first Bad Boys movie. Even though part two is my favorite, I still appreciate that. Yeah, we're not just thinking of Bad Boys 2, we're thinking of the first movie as well. The chemistry between Will Smith and Martin Lawrence hasn't aged a day. It's violent, it's gory, it's really funny. There's some good jokes, um, fun action scenes. This is just a kick-ass fucking movie. Bad Boys for Life is awesome. And yes, I do look forward to Bad Boys Ride or Die. I think that's what it's called. Very much so, actually. I even made Meadow a fan of the Bad Boys movies. But hands down, the best movie of 2020 coming in at number 1 for me is Birds of Prey or Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn. I think they should have just called it Harley Quinn Birds of Prey, but I just call it Birds of Prey. Um, Again, not much to say about this. I already praised it enough back in my DCEU video, but this is a damn solid movie. I do think this probably is, like, if not the most, it's probably the second most underrated movie of the DC Extended Universe, because it kind of seems like, of the few that get a whole bunch of praise and then the few that get a whole bunch of hate, Birds of Prey and one or two others just kind of sit there in the middle where nobody talks about them enough. And I actually think Birds of Prey is like smack dab in the middle of maybe being the most underrated one of the whole franchise. It was the first one to be R rated. It definitely does channel a lot of Deadpool energy into it, and it has a very Deadpool type aesthetic to it, where it's self-aware. Harley Quinn breaks the fourth wall. There's a lot of uber raunchy jokes. Um, but still, Birds of Prey kicks a lot of ass. Ewan McGregor is fantastic as Roman Sionis, aka the Black Mask. He's gay as fuck, and he's hilarious for it. The action scenes are fantastic. This probably has the strongest martial arts choreography for the whole DC Extended Universe. Um, there's some really nasty, visceral, hard-hitting action scenes, namely the police station fight, especially when Harley's taking that baseball bat and just cracking apart people's kneecaps. It's awesome and cringy at the same time, but very entertaining. Um, well, yeah, Roman's death, it's a cool kill, but it is a little anticlimactic. But still, in the end, this is a kick-ass fucking movie, and was the last movie that I saw in theaters for a long time, and well, until late the next year. Um, Still, yeah. Before my theater shut down for almost 2 years, yeah, this was the last movie that I saw in theaters. And with all that being said, let us jump into just going right into it. Ranking all the movies I've seen from 2021. We have 19 here. A lot of these I've also talked about as well. Coming in at number 19 is Black Friday. I fucking hated this movie. You give us the concept of a bunch of people on Black Friday being stuck inside a retail store while a zombie outbreak on Thanksgiving occurs, and one of the main characters is played by Bruce Campbell. And you take that concept and you completely botch it. What the fuck? Everybody is unlikable and annoying, especially Bruce Campbell. It doesn't go into that, because I work in retail, so I relate to a lot of this. This is why the opening scene of Thanksgiving works so well for me. You don't even remotely tap into like Karens and assholes and greedy pieces of shit just wanting to take everything for themselves and take advantage of Black Friday deals. You don't even remotely get into showcasing that stuff. Again, this is why Thanksgiving works so much better than this movie. Um, it's not funny, like, at all. It's extremely dry. There's hardly any kill scenes. The special effects and the zombies look like shit. And then you have Michael Jai White, a legendary martial artist, and he's one of the first people to get killed off in this movie. And then having a very anticlimactic, non-bullshit ending. This movie sucked. Sucked ass through a straw. I felt cheated out of $10 because that's how much I paid for this piece of shit. Garbage. I hated this fucking movie. Coming in at number 18 is Black Widow. Yeah, I really was not impressed. Like I said in my DCEU video, this movie was very textbook and generic and standard. This was the only MCU film that we had gotten, at least that I can name off the top of my head. Well, no, there was a couple others in 2021, I think. But anyway, this was the first one that we had gotten since Avengers. Was it Avengers Endgame? Yeah, I think so. And people were waiting so long for a Black Widow movie, but then it finally comes out. It gets delayed 3 times, and it's not worth the wait. And this is the film that solidified for me. I have absolutely no desire to ever see a single MCU film for until the franchise ends. um Scarlett Johansson does do a decent job as Black Widow, of course, and this does feel like a good swan song for Scarlett Johansson to go out on. But ironically, despite it being called Black Widow, it doesn't really feel like that much of a Black Widow movie because it also showcases David Harbour as the Red Guardian, whom is entertaining. And I actually kind of wish they did focus on him a lot more. But he and Scarlett Johansson are also overshadowed by Rachel Weisz, whose character is flatter than a plateau for me, and Florence Pugh's character, who is bland and boring as a plateau. And also the villains, quote unquote, one of which being a man who looks a whole hell of a lot like Harvey Weinstein. And that's a big problem that I have with this movie. It really feels like it's just like a jerk off fantasy for all those who are angry at Harvey Weinstein in the whole Me Too movement bullshit. Not that I'm saying that Harvey Weinstein isn't a piece of shit. He is, and what he did to a whole bunch of women throughout his career is disgusting, and he should have been punished for it. But to go so far as to take the main villain of this movie and make him look so much like Harvey Weinstein, the whole women empowerment, Me Too movement bullshit feels very shoved down your throat, and it feels forced and pointless. Not really pointless, but it's just, yeah, forced and frustrating a little bit. Takes away from the film. But also, Taskmaster, the other villain of this film, is not Taskmaster. Not that I necessarily have a problem with Taskmaster being gender swapped, but the character does not act like Taskmaster. This is why characters like Gwenpool work. Yeah, it's a female version of Deadpool, but she still acts like Deadpool. She still acts like the Merc with a mouth. This version of Taskmaster, had she acted a lot like the comic version of Taskmaster, it would have been fine. The suit looks cool, and her one or maybe two fight scenes with Black Widow are kind of entertaining, but this does not feel like Taskmaster whatsoever. It feels like a hollow shell that looks and is called like Taskmaster, but it's not even close to being Taskmaster. And that's the other thing too. I think this movie lacks a lot of decent action. Like what we have is not bad, but again, it's just very basic and generic. Had this movie come out um like either during the first phase of the MCU or maybe early phase 2, I think it would have gone over a little better. But for a movie that's this generic and this basic to be released this late into the franchise, nah, guys, you could have done better. And while I did say that this is a decent swan song for Scarlett Johansson, at the same time, it's not, because then you just realize, oh, well, this movie just goes right into the events of Infinity War and Endgame. So, what was the point of this movie? Whatever. Yeah. Black Widow is not a terrible film, but it's just kind of unnecessary. And I have no desire to ever see it again. Although I did like the final scene when she flies off in the Quinjet. I did like that little snippet of the Avengers theme that was played. It feels again like a good send off for Black Widow. Coming in at number 17 is Candyman. Yeah, I really wanted to like this movie more. It's well made. It's got a good cast. And well, the characters aren't anything special, but a lot of the acting and performances are still pretty strong. You can tell that they were really trying to make this feel like a proper continuation of the original Candyman, but it's just got too many damn problems. It's obviously missing a lot of footage. It is very preachy and heavy-handed with a lot of its PC woke agenda messages that it wants to convey. White cops are shitty, black people are oppressed by others, and they want to gentrify the living shit out of the entirety of Chicago. Um, people being or black people being persecuted and discriminated against and just being assholes to innocent people. It's very heavy-handed and it's really shoved down your throat, and it takes away from the message of or it takes away from what this movie's trying to be. It's a complete opposite of the original Candyman. Candyman, the original, does have political messages and it does deal with race. But the thing is, it's subtle and it's secondary to telling a good story. This movie is the exact opposite. It wants to focus on those heavy handed political messages at the expense of the story. That's not how you do it. I do think, had this movie been directed, like actually directed by Jordan Peele, it would have been better. But Nia DaCosta's inexperience just sticks out like a sore thumb. And while yes, there are many elements where you do feel like, yeah, that's Jordan Peele straight up. At the same time, I think he's an experienced and good enough director to have those messages that this film has and make them subtle. Nia DaCosta does not. Um, oh, and this movie ungodly underutilizes Tony Todd. It's not even funny. 10 seconds of screen time? Really? Come on now, you can do better than that. Coming in at number 16 is The Matrix Resurrection. This movie also feels very unnecessary. People have been clamoring for years and years and years for more Matrix movies. And we had to wait 18 years for a new Matrix film to finally get made. And the best that they can do is have this movie be almost two-thirds just a remake of the original Matrix. Really, guys? Really? And I definitely agree with Shawnee Boy. This movie does feel like it was directed by the lesser of the two Wachowskis, like the one that really did not know how to do action and cinematography. Um, the writing and the story, that, well, even then, that's decent in this movie, but the action scenes are very flat, very boring. Maybe some of that has to do with Keanu Reeves's like physical limitations, because this is post John Wick 1, 2, and 3. But still, mm, then maybe they really just shouldn't have had Keanu Reeves return. Because the movie is all about rebooting slash continuing the Matrix franchise, bringing back old and new. So then maybe they should have recast Neo. I mean, Keanu Reeves does a good job with what he's given, but still, um, yeah, this movie was just not a terrible film by any means, but it's just not the fourth Matrix movie that I would have asked for. And because, well, I don't really see how this movie, because apparently it was criticized for being outdated, which I think is kind of a dumb criticism. But yeah, you made us wait 18 years for a new Matrix movie, and this is the best you could do? Nah, come on now. That's why I actually do support a fifth film down the way, and apparently it will just be a complete reboot for the series. I'm actually kind of in favor of that because maybe then it could rectify this movie. Coming in at number 15 is Dune Part 1. I really was not impressed by this movie, really at all. It's not a bad film, but it's got very flat, very boring action scenes. Um, Not really unlikable characters, but I am very unfamiliar with Dune lore. I've never read any of the Dune books. I saw the movie from the 80s once, maybe 15 years ago. So this movie just feels very alien and very disconnected from me. So, but I still tried. The main issue that I have with Dune, aside from the flat and boring action and the flat and boring characters, this very much this has first chapter syndrome. First chapter syndrome up the ass. You can tell that this is nothing but setup. Nothing but setup, build up, character development, and all that jazz. Sure, you could say a lot of that could pay off with Dune Part 2. Thing is, I don't really have a desire to see Dune Part 2. I really was not impressed by this movie enough to check out the sequel. Sorry. It's got a good cast too, like Jason Momoa, Dave Bautista, Stellan Skarsgård, Rebecca Ferguson. But yeah, just really was not all that impressed by this movie. Coming in at number 14 is Paranormal Activity: The Next of Kin. um Not much to say. I talked about this enough last year with my Paranormal Activity videos. Well, it's not exactly the return to proper Paranormal Activity form that I would have asked for. It is still entertaining enough as its own movie. This does not really feel. This feels like a complete reboot to the Paranormal Activity franchise. It feels very isolated, very cut off from the rest of the franchise. And as a result, I actually would not be surprised if this was an unrelated script that they just slapped the name Paranormal Activity on. But, the characters are interesting enough. It's got a good concept. There is some decent moments of suspense, and there is some decent scares. I didn't much care for the ending. And really, it kind of feels like a lot of the most fucked up shit they save for the last 20 minutes. But I would say that the journey to get there is intriguing and creepy enough to keep you entertained until then. So yeah, not a bad film by any means, but just kind of meh. And this is the part of the list where, like, Black Friday to Matrix Resurrection, those are the bad movies. Dune Part 1 until like number 10 on this list. These are the meh to mixed movies for me. Okay, number 13 is Willy's Wonderland. Yes, it's ripping off Five Nights at Freddy's. There's no doubt about it. Although, ironically, of the three Five Nights at Freddy's movies that have been made, the Banana Splits movie, Willy's Wonderland, and Five Nights at Freddy's, this is the best one. This is without a doubt the best one. Nicolas Cage is very entertaining. He's very quirky and and fun to watch. The other characters are just cannon fodder to be killed off by the animatronics, but that's okay. There's some decent kills. There's some decent gore. There's some fun action scenes and a couple minorly decently suspenseful moments. Nothing too special, but just enough to get the job done. And it does have a fun and entertaining feel and vibe to it. Um, yeah, not much to say. I liked Willy's Wonderland. Number 12, pardon Roman. Coming in at number 12 is Army of the Dead, Zack Snyder's spiritual successor to his Dawn of the Dead remake. And I like that one more. Army of the Dead is not a bad movie. You can tell that Zack was, especially coming off his superhero stuff, it does feel like a breath of fresh air because this does feel like 100% Zack Snyder's like film. There was no studio interference, no reshoots or re-edits. This just feels like a straightforward A to B Zack Snyder movie. So it's entertaining, it's well made, it's got some decent action scenes, and it has a decent premise, but it's just not as fun as it should be. Like a lot of the characters are kind of unlikable. I do not care for a lot of the zombie kills in this movie because we don't really see people getting eaten by zombies nowadays. And I feel like this movie was really lacking that. You see people getting swarmed by a bunch of zombies, but then when you see their corpse later on, there's only like scratches and a couple bites and just blood slathered all over their body. Excuse me, they don't really get eaten. They just get bit and killed, and then the zombies move on. Um, it has also kind of an anticlimactic, pointless ending. Then Dave Bautista gets killed off, which I didn't care for like at all. I actually do kind of think that the best part of the movie is the first 20 minutes, especially showing the zombie outbreak and then what happens throughout Las Vegas until it's finally closed off from the rest of the world. But yeah, this was fun enough. I have to give it a second watch because admittedly I've only seen this one once. But yeah, Army of the Dead was good. It's not as good as Dawn of the Dead though. And speaking of zombies, this movie has that similar problem too. Number 11 is Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City. This does feel like a Resident Evil movie. It's got good special effects, it's got some cool monster designs, some fun action scenes, and some good music too. So it's an entertaining movie. I have mainly two problems with it. One is I do think some of the characters are pretty miscast, namely Albert Wesker and Leon S. Kennedy. Albert Wesker, not necessarily he's miscast, but his character is very different from the game versions of Albert Wesker. And Leon S. Kennedy in this movie is a complete pansy ass pussy. Does not feel like the badass cop that we all know Leon to be in the games. Nah, and the other big problem that I have with this movie is, if you want to make a film adaptation of the Resident Evil games and be much closer to the source material, that's fine. I approve of that. But to do that, but cram two games into 1 hour and 40-minute long movie, nah, that's not how you do it. I'm sorry. This movie feels very rushed, but it also feels very bloated and overstuffed because it's cramming two adaptations of two giant games into one film. This does not work. You should have just separated both halves of the movie into. You should have just separated both adaptations into two separate films. You could have a new Resident Evil franchise with that. Well, I think they plan to, but I also think they're planning on adapting Resident Evil 3 and 4 into one game as well, or into one movie, excuse me, as well. Sorry. Um, yeah, that's all I have to say. Yeah, Welcome to Raccoon City is not bad, but it just could have been a little bit better. That's the epitome of this movie at number 10. Uh Venom, Let There Be Carnage. This is not as good as the first movie, and it's really held back by two main problems. One is that it's not R rated. The first Venom film also should have been R rated, but it makes it work. But with this movie, with the character of Carnage being introduced, actually, I have three problems actually. With the character of Carnage being introduced, one of the most violent and psychopathic characters in the entire Marvel universe, to water him down and restrain him with the PG-13 rating does not work. It sticks out like a sore thumb. You expect to see Carnage going around and causing carnage and mayhem, and we only see like half mayhem in this movie because it's PG-13. This really should have been an R-rated bloody splatterfest. Would have been a lot more entertaining. Two is Carnage is killed off. I think that's a huge, huge mistake for a franchise and a villain as iconic and well known as Carnage. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of Carnage, but it's debatable on whether or not Carnage is a bigger Spider-Man villain or a Venom villain. And if you want to consider him a Venom villain, Carnage is pretty much like the ultimate rival for Venom. But then to kill him off uh, after the one time that he's introduced in a movie, it just feels like you're shooting yourselves in the foot. I mean, yeah, how he's killed is funny, but it just does not work from a filmmaking perspective for me. If I was to make this movie, I would have had Carnage survive, get his ass kicked, but still be around to come and fight back another day. And that's a fourth problem too, is that despite the film being called Let There Be Carnage, Venom and Carnage only have one scene together at the very end. But this leads me into my biggest problem with this movie. This movie is way, 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 way too short. The first Venom film, discounting the post-credit scene and the credits, it's still like an hour and 48 minutes. That's plenty. Discounting both of the post-credit scenes and the credits, Venom Let There Be Carnage is an hour and 24 minutes. It's so much shorter, and it's way too fast paced. It flies by at a million miles an hour. It feels like it's a 45-minute watch. It is not a worthy sequel to Venom, which is still one of my favorite superhero films of all time. If this movie was a half hour longer and if it was R rated, even if you wanted to kill off Carnage, at least the film still could have been entertaining. Excuse me. Um, yeah, this movie could have been better. So why the hell do I have it at number 10? That's because the movie is entertaining. It is really funny. It does have decent action scenes and it has good special effects. And Woody Harrelson does a great job as Cletus Cassidy. Yeah, it's just a very, very mixed bag of a film. But I can watch it and enjoy it. But it could have been better. Really, really could have been better. Coming in at number 9 is The Forever Purge, the fifth Purge film. Um, it's not as big in scale as it wants to be. It tries, but it just feels like it falls a little bit too short from the big scale that it wants to achieve. But it's got some great action scenes. Um, good music, good moments of suspense, and there's some really well shot scenes. including a couple long take action scenes that I thought were pretty good. It's got a decent cast, some good characters. Um, but it's just a purge movie. It's nothing uber special. And coming off of Purge 2 and 3, while it doesn't feel quite like a step back, it still kind of feels like it's just coasting on the base level for a Purge film. Not as much as the first movie, though. I think we can all agree that the first Purge movie is still the worst of the movies, at least. But I do look forward to that sixth movie that's coming out. Had this been the finale to the Purge series, I would have been a little more pissed off at it, but it's not. Coming in at number 8 is The Tomorrow War, my first ever streaming exclusive movie that was not a Netflix film. Yeah, The Tomorrow War was actually a pretty big pleasant surprise. I also watched this when Roman was first born. It's got a really good concept. It's got a good cast: Chris Pratt, Yvonne Strahovski, and J.K. Simmons. Um, it's got fun action scenes. It's got a really nasty, very unique and cool species of antagonistic aliens that they fight back against. White tips, I think they're called. Um, my only real problems is it's not R rated. Because with how nasty the aliens are in this movie, if there was some good R-rated, violent, fucked up, gory action in this movie, it would have been a lot more entertaining. But it's PG-13 and it's very clean. Like even when people are torn apart by these aliens, there's hardly any blood. It feels very gentrified and safe and sterilized. Um, and a tiny bit of an anticlimactic ending as well. Still, though, the Tomorrow War does kick quite a bit of ass. It's got, again, great action scenes, great effects. It's very entertaining and very well made. Yeah, Tomorrow War was a big pleasant surprise. Coming in at number 7 is Spiral from the Book of Saw. In hindsight, this actually might be my favorite Saw movie. Chris Rock is very entertaining in this movie. He's got some good dialogue, he's got some good jokes. But he also kind of inadvertently shot himself in the foot because he's proven that he can do more serious roles. And I think if he doesn't, it'll be a damn big shame. Um, the Saw side of things of this movie, like the traps and the gore, may feel a little not restrained, but I think a little bit more basic. I mean, the traps that we do have are still gnarly and fucked up. And this movie kind of does hate police officers, which also is kind of channeling some of that similar spirit that Candyman has, where it just talks shit about cops the whole movie. Although here, though, I think it is a bit more appropriate, especially since the Saw films have been dealing with corrupt, shitty cops for a majority of the franchise. So here it does feel appropriate. It does have a typical Saw type ending. Um, but I do look forward to hopefully a future Saw film acknowledging the events of this movie. So Spiral was pretty damn awesome. And it does again have a really good cast. Chris Rock is great. The other characters, I can't remember their names, but they're pretty good. And Sam Jackson is hilarious in this movie. Anyone? Crickets. I thought that was funny. Number 6 is A Quiet Place Part 2, my first movie since Birds of Prey that I saw in theaters, and the last movie that I saw in theaters until Godzilla minus one. Yeah. And the last movie that me and Meadow watched together before marathoning all the Twilight films before Roman was born. Still, and we were paranoid that Meadow was going to give, or at least her water was going to break during the movie, but obviously it didn't. But yeah, still though, yeah, Quiet Place is a damn good sequel. I don't know if it's 100% worth the couple delays that it had because it has a little bit of Halloween 2 syndrome where I like that it picks up right where the first one left off. So it does this really feel like just part 1 of Quiet Place, which is nice. Oh dear, I'm sorry. Ouch. Hold on one second. I don't mean to laugh, but that's relatable. Anyway, sorry, that's one of my friends that's texting me. So yeah, Quiet Place Part 2, it does feel like a proper continuation of A Quiet Place. All the characters are back, all the cast members are back. The younger son, you can obviously tell that he's 3 years older, but still he does kind of look the same. It's just he's a little heavier and he's a little taller. But if you suspend your disbelief, it still works. Oh, okay. Um, Never mind. Crisis averted. We do see more screen time of the monsters, which is nice. It still maintains that same level of suspense and tension as the first movie. Like I found myself in the theater not wanting to make any noise, just like I did for the first movie. Um, uh, Sorry, a lot of people are texting me. What the hell? I still maintain, well, both Quiet Place movies, I think, have this problem, is that they should be R rated, but you don't have to have a hard R rating, but still, the kills in this movie do feel a little tame and restrained. They're still shocking and startling enough, but the lack of gore sticks out like a sore thumb. Um, I do like that they incorporate not as much, but there is human versus human conflict, but it doesn't take away from the monsters. The monsters are still obviously the main threat, and they do a great job of still making them feel scary and threatening. And the ending does leave a little bit to be desired. Like it feels like, yeah, there's a third one on the way. Which I know that there is a third Quiet Place movie on the way, but it's not a sequel, it's a prequel, which I think that's kind of pointless because we saw enough like origin elements in this movie to get the main picture. We don't need to see a whole drawn out prequel storyline showcasing what happened in the Quiet Place universe. I feel like we did that just fine and plenty in this movie. But yeah, Quiet Place 2 is still really good, very solid. And the inclusion of Jimon Hansu, who's abruptly and anticlimactically killed off, and Killian Murphy especially is a nice surprise. Excuse me. Top 5 territory, and here we have Mortal Kombat. I didn't ask very much from this movie. I wanted a good actor cast for Scorpion, which we got that. A good Scorpion versus Sub-Zero fight, which we kind of get too. And I wanted this to be R-rated. I got all my wishes with this movie. I mean, yeah, it's not really much of an adaptation of any particular Mortal Kombat game. But it's got a good cast. It's got some good characters, good use of Mortal Kombat characters. Sonya, Kano, Reptile, um, Goro, Scorpion, Sub Zero. Raiden. If you know Mortal Kombat characters, you Liu Kang, you get a nice um selection to choose from in this movie. And yeah, it's R rated. There's fucked up, violent, gory fight scenes galore in this movie. And the martial arts choreography is really solid. Yeah, the fight scenes are entertaining. It feels like a Mortal Kombat movie. The main character is a little flat and bland. He should have just either been Liu Kang or Johnny Storm, or not Johnny Storm, Johnny Cage, excuse me. But apparently, they are incorporating Johnny Cage into the sequel. Hopefully, he's played by Scott Adkins. But anyway, yeah, Mortal Kombat kicked ass. It gave me what I asked for, nothing else. That's what I wanted. Coming in at number 4 is Halloween Kills. I've already talked about this movie plenty. Halloween Kills kicks ass. I wanted to see Michael Myers going on a rampage, and it gave me what I wanted. Great kills. It's violent. It's gory. It's funny, and it's wildly entertaining. Only thing that kind of sucks about it is that whole middle section with the escaped mental patient. But outside of that, Halloween Kills is a kick-ass Halloween movie. Coming in at number 3 is Godzilla versus Kong. I'm actually not as much of a hater of this movie as I was in my review that I did last year, because I've watched Godzilla versus Kong a couple more times. Yeah, it's a good movie. It's a kick-ass fucking monster movie. It is a shame that there is so much fucking missing footage from this movie, and we really, really should have seen either the 2 hour and 15-minute cut or the 2 hour and 40-minute cut. But still, Godzilla versus Kong is a badass monster movie. There's good Godzilla action, there's good Kong action, great action scenes, amazing special effects. It's very colorful. And watching Godzilla and Kong fight each other, of course, is the highlight of the movie. And as in hindsight, it probably is a good blueprint for the new empire to take advantage of, which it did. Coming in at number 2 is The Suicide Squad. Terrible title. Come on. Suicide Squad Warzone. Just call it that. But yeah, this also in many ways is kind of a very underrated movie of the DC extended universe. I've never seen anybody outright hate it, but I've never seen anybody say it's their favorite or one of their favorites, but it's one of mine. It's one of my favorite films of all time. It's one of my favorite superhero films. Um, the terrible title and the not very good soundtrack that this film has. Like in hindsight, like I watched this movie back to back with the first Suicide Squad movie, and even Meadow noticed, yeah, the soundtrack is not as good as Suicide Squad 2016, but still, this movie kicks ass. Sylvester Stallone does a great job as King Shark. King Shark's kind of the highlight of the movie, aside from Peacemaker. And the gore. This is definitely the most violent installment of the whole DC extended universe. There are some gnarly, fucked up, sloppy ass kills in this movie, and it's awesome. Yeah, great action scenes, a good selection of lesser known characters that are utilized pretty well. Um, Great jokes, really good humor, great action scenes. And this has a bit more of a good self-aware tone that I think is more well done than Harley Quinn Birds of Prey in my opinion. Yeah, not much to say. And hmm, I don't know. I don't know if I should say that Margot Robbie's best performance is either this or Birds of Prey. I'm not sure. But still, Margot Robbie does great. It is a nice final outing for Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn. And my number one favorite film of 2021, what the hell else could it be? Zack Snyder's Justice League, a masterpiece of superhero filmmaking. Yes, it's long. I really don't give a fuck. This is a masterpiece. amazing action scenes, an excellent adaptation of Justice League. Great cast of characters, great action scenes. It's very colorful. It's very well paced. There may be one or two scenes that you could have snipped out, but I still think the film is perfect in its entirety. I love this movie. It's a masterpiece of the superhero genre. Highly underrated. It's got a lot of fans, but I still think it's underrated. So that'll do it for Super Cinema Rank episode 2. The next episode will be on 2022. I think probably by itself. Maybe. I'm not sure. But post your comments down below. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and share this video with your friends. And as always, go out and watch your favorite films. And I will see you guys in the next video.